For as long as we've had words, we've tried to capture the elusive shadow of who we are. Are we a fixed archetype, carved in stone, or a fluid mystery, changing with the light? We've mapped the mind using whatever metaphors our era provided. The ancients balanced our humors in alchemical vials. Victorians charted personality on the surface of the skull. And psychoanalysis plunged us into the subconscious. 1,000 ways to name a person. Yet these historical maps were too subjective, too fluid. To truly understand ourselves, we needed to abandon the poetry and begin to measure. In 1920, a young psychologist named Gordon Allport visited Sigmund Freud, sharing a simple observation of a little boy on a tram who was terrified of dirt. Freud, endlessly searching for deep unconscious trauma, famously responded, "And was that little boy you?" Allport was horrified. To him, psychoanalysis dug too deep. Sometimes a kid on a train is just a kid on a train. He realized you don't always need to excavate the buried past to understand a person. You can just measure their present, observable behavior. This pivot birthed trait theory and shifted the study of personality from the analyst's couch to the scientist's laboratory. To measure personality today, psychologists rely on the Big Five, a structural framework often remembered by the acronym OCEAN: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. These aren't binary boxes. They are continuous spectrums. You aren't simply an introvert or an extrovert. You exist somewhere along a sliding scale, adjusting your shape based on where you fall. As these values slide, they combine to form a unique architecture of who you are. High openness might expand your conceptual boundaries, while conscientiousness brings structure to the chaos. But remember, these sliders predict your average behavior over time. They are the baseline of your internal engine, not an absolute rule for every given Tuesday. Yet, as precise as this measurement feels, there's a missing variable. Because the self doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in the world. Trait theory maps our internal machinery, but it leaves out the world outside. Psychologist Albert Bandura realized that personality doesn't exist in a vacuum. We operate in a continuous loop called reciprocal determinism. Your internal thoughts, your behaviors, and your environment constantly influence each other. You aren't just placed into a situation. Your actions actively shape the room you're in, which in turn reshapes you. A major gear in this system is your locus of control. Do you believe you're steering the ship or just riding the waves? An internal locus trusts your actions dictate outcomes. An external locus feels the environment calls the shots. But observing this tangled feedback loop raises an obvious challenge. How do psychologists practically capture and measure this complexity? If the self is a complex loop, how do we capture it? Psychoanalysts tried bypassing the conscious mind entirely. Projective tests, like the Rorschach inkblot, were designed to coax hidden conflicts into the light. The thematic apperception test asks you to narrate an ambiguous scene. There are no right answers here, only reflections of your own internal landscape. But trait theorists demanded rigorous data. They built objective personality inventories. Tests like the MMPI use hundreds of true or false questions to distill human behavior into cold, quantifiable grids. Social cognitive psychologists prefer seeing you in action. Through behavioral observation, they track exactly how you navigate and alter your environment in real time. Then the humanists step back from the clipboard. For them, the truest measure is the distance between your actual self and your ideal self, a gap that defines our lifelong drive to grow. When the grids fade and the tests are tallied, we are left with the profound space of our possible selves, the glowing ideal we strive toward, and the shadowed fears we run from. We've built incredible laboratories and complex languages to try and measure every dimension of the mind. Yet, despite all our tools, identity refuses to be permanently mapped or solved like an equation, because you're more than just a score on a test. Ultimately, you are an unfolding question, constantly being answered, yet never quite closed.